This video is sponsored by Established Titles. Star Wars Andor is a failure. Sure, it has its fans, and creatively it may be the best thing to come out of Lucasfilm for a while, but that doesn't matter, because commercially, as measured by Disney Plus viewership courtesy of Nielsen, hardly anyone is watching it. The only possible interpretation of that is that the Star Wars brand has been severely damaged and is in dire need of repair. The very last thing Lucasfilm should do in such a situation is hire another bad robot alumni with an extremely spotty track record and whose very name will cause fans of any and all genre entertainment to recoil. So naturally, Kathleen Kennedy went and did just that, by hiring Damon Lindelof. In this editorial then, we will begin by looking into these latest news and the likely reason why they have come about, and finally, why this is the last thing they should do. Within the industry, there have been rumors that Damon Lindelof has been circling Star Wars for some time, and this was finally confirmed by Deadline Hollywood on October 23rd. The exclusive, and we'll get back to that, reads: following months of speculation, Deadline is now hearing from several sources close to the project that not only is Damon Lindelof developing a new Star Wars film for Lucasfilm, but that Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy has been set as director. We'll get back to her in due time, but for now, let's focus on Lindelof. Lindelof is co-writing the project, though it is unknown at this time who his writing partner might be. Insiders say the script is still being written, which means production is likely far out. That said, sources add it was important to Lucasfilm and Lindelof that a director be brought on so that that person's own vision for where they see this story headed gets included in the script. Lucasfilm and reps for Obaid-Chinoy could not be reached for comment, which, as we're about to see, is fully intentional. As for what the film is actually focused on, that will remain under wraps, as this project remains one of the more guarded secrets in all of Hollywood. As for when we'll see this film, while it still seems a ways off, the feeling is, given how proactive executives were in finding a director for this film, that this Star Wars feature seems to have the most momentum out of all of the current films in development at the studio. 2019's Star Wars The Rise of Palpatine was the last film to bow in theaters, with the studio focusing on its TV projects over the recent years since then. That said, they have a number of films in development, including this one, and Lucasfilm has been pretty clear they want to make sure the next series of films has a story they're happy with, and don't see a need to rush out the next franchise. Which is Hollywood speak for that they are desperate and they know that they can't fail with this. But they will, because with Damon Lindelof on board, failure is virtually guaranteed. But before we get into why that is, let's explore the nature of this exclusive. Because this was no official announcement, but a leak straight from the production team. Why would they leak something like this directly to an industry trade, as opposed to save it for something like D23 or Star Wars Celebration? I mean, this year's D23 could have used something a bit more juicy. Just ask John Campea.
We'd like to present to you a cartoon show filled with cartoon characters we've all seen already many fucking times!
Lords of showmanship, the powers that be at Lucasfilm most decidedly are not. But on the topic of lords, and before we move on with the story behind this leak and why Lindelof is a disaster, I'm something of a lord myself, and courtesy of Established Titles, this video sponsor, I have the certificate to prove it. Established Titles is a project based around a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. Through Established Titles, you can be the owner of at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland, which by Scottish tradition makes you a lord or a lady, and you'll get an official certificate with a crest to prove it. This certificate features a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. But there's more to it. To support worldwide reforestation efforts, Established Titles work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future, so for every order a tree will be planted. Now, this is of course a fun novelty, and it makes for a great gift. In places where prefixes are allowed in official documents, you might even be able to replace Mr. or Miss with Lord and Lady. Established Titles is running a fall sale right now, and if you use our code MIDEDGE10, you get an additional 10% off. Also, Established Titles told me that the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using our link will effectively be next to my plot within minutes of walking distance. Depending on how many of you want to become a lord or a lady, we can build our little Midnight's Edge kingdom. Go to establishedtitles.com/midedge10 to get your titles now, link is in the description. With that, let's get back to what this Lindelof leak could be all about. Under normal circumstances, I do not doubt that they would have waited to announce something like this for D23 or Star Wars Celebration or something to that effect. But a few things happened last week which may have facilitated someone to backdoor announce this to Deadline Hollywood without Disney signing off on it. And we know they didn't, because if they did, this would have been an official announcement with statements from everyone who declined to comment. One possible suspect is Damon Lindelof's camp. You see, last week, even the major trades picked up on Alan Moore trash-talking not just Lindelof's prematurely cancelled Watchmen TV series, but Lindelof himself. That would have been very embarrassing for Lindelof, as all of his friends and business associates would have read that, and he would have heard no end of it. And would likely want nothing more than to shift the narrative, like, forget that Alan Moore thinks I'm a hack, I'm writing Star Wars. Another suspect is the entire Kennedy faction of Lucasfilm, because they need some good news right about now. Last week, Nielsen released the top streaming content, and Star Wars Andor was far down the list. Apparently, Bob Chapek now has so much evidence of malpractice in both Lucasfilm, Pixar and Marvel that firings have begun. And indeed, there was a high-profile firing in Lucasfilm only last week when another Bad Robot alumni, Michelle Rejwan, was given a production deal, which is how you fire executives in Hollywood, make them producers. Rejwan, who apparently is as woke as they come, was once touted as and reportedly groomed to be Kathleen Kennedy's eventual replacement, and her being fired would have freaked the Kennedy faction out. If Michelle Rejwan can be fired, anyone can be, so this could be an attempt to demonstrate that, see, we're working on cool stuff that fans will love. But if they thought anyone would be won over by Damon Lindelof, they were sorely mistaken. Let's see why. Damon Lindelof got his major breakthrough on Lost, the series where so many future Bad Robot alumni first went wild with mystery boxes, and mastered the art of creating an incredible build-up, but then completely and utterly drop the ball after that. He co-wrote a few mostly harmless and forgettable original productions, but he is most notorious for his work on established franchises. He co-wrote Star Trek Into Darkness, the movie which killed any and all momentum the franchise had after the 2009 reboot, and which was so bad it directly caused the sequel after that to bomb and end that iteration of the franchise. One of his worst offenses, though, is Ridley Scott's Alien prequel, Prometheus. Original writer Jon Spaihts had actually written a fairly decent draft which actually was a full-on Alien prequel, but then Lindelof was brought on to do a rewrite, turning a fairly solid and concise script into the utter mess which was put on screen instead. Echoing his work on Star Trek, it was so bad that it caused the sequel after that to bomb and end that iteration of the franchise too. Now, I'm not saying that Damon Lindelof is all around incompetent, but I am saying that his brand of writing is best employed on his own original stories, because the moment he plays in someone else's sandbox, certainly franchises, they tend to end. Fans have long since picked up on this, but I guess the powers that be at Lucasfilm must be a bit slow on the uptake, or they would never have hired someone like Damon Lindelof in the first place. But they did, so what story has he cooked up? The day after that initial Deadline Hollywood scoop, The Hollywood Reporter ran a scoop of their own. Note that this is still no official announcement, but more leaks coming straight from the production team. This write-up opens with, "The project has been in the works for months, and while Lindelof is getting the Wookiee-sized share of attention, thanks in no small part to a pedigree that includes co-creating TV sensation Lost and shepherding the acclaimed HBO series Watchmen." Well, it wasn't acclaimed by Alan Moore, and it was cancelled after only one season, so nice reframing there. Be that as it may, the point is that Lindelof is co-writing with Justin Britt Gibson, whom I'm not familiar with, so let's get around to what matters. Sources, who are probably very close to Lindelof because he got so much unwarranted praise and coverage here, say the movie project is intended as a standalone, but in success could lead to more movies. That plan goes against the grain of earlier Lucasfilm development processes, which saw the company try to come up with new trilogies. Now, the studio seems to focus on standalones. Okay, that's some BS right there. They did not develop the sequel trilogy as a trilogy, but as 3 standalone movies, where each subsequent movie tried to subvert and retcon the one that came before it. But moving on. And sources say that the story would take place after the events of 2019's Star Wars The Rise of Palpatine, although it would not be a continuation of the Skywalker saga. It could, however, feature some of the characters from the Star Wars trilogy made in the 2010s. That's a complicated way of saying the sequel trilogy. In other words, what they're saying is that this movie will take place in the aftermath of the sequel trilogy. You know, the trilogy which killed the Star Wars franchise and that has 0 fans. And this movie will reference and acknowledge it by way of bringing back some of the characters from it. And it's written by Damon Lindelof. That the powers that be at Lucasfilm seem to think this is a good idea only goes to show how out of touch they are with the audience and with the real world. But I wouldn't worry about the further damage that Lindelof's Star Wars movie is going to do to the franchise just yet. Statistically, chances are that like almost every other Star Wars movie announced in the last couple of years, this will never see the light of day. Star Wars movies being announced has become something of a running joke, so much so that according to Matthew Baloney's Puck magazine, Disney has asked Kathleen Kennedy to just stop announcing movies. Because whenever she does, it in the end only translates into ridicule and negative PR when the projects inevitably fall apart. Or in this case, even before it falls apart, because no one wants a Star Wars movie that is written by Damon Lindelof or that acknowledges the franchise-destroying sequel trilogy. And again, this is not an official announcement that Disney signed off on, but since it leaked straight from the production team, it might as well have been. And that will give Bob Chapek even more reason to start firing even more people within Lucasfilm, which we hear is the next step. So tell me, what do you feel about continuing the story beyond the sequel trilogy as imagined by Damon Lindelof, the bane of both Star Trek and Prometheus? Is that something you would like to see? Let me know in the comments, and before you go, remember that Established Titles is running a big sale right now, and if you use the code MIDEDGE10, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/midedge10 now, link is in the description.